Hello, and thank you for joining this last VMware TAM customer webinar of 2021. The VMware TAM community organizes this webinar to provide our customers the opportunity to hear useful content and interact directly with great speakers that are delivering it. Our goal is to make sure that you are getting full benefit from your VMware software. Please make use of the Q&A feature to ask any questions, and if your question doesn't get addressed today, be sure and reach out to your TAM and ask them to follow up on your behalf. Before we get into today's content, just a couple of basic announcements. The first is that our next TAM customer webinar will be on January 13th, and we'll be hearing about the new features available in ESXi 3.2. This is a big update, and so you won't want to miss this session. As I mentioned earlier, we want you to interact with the speaker. So if you have any questions during today's webinar, please use the Q&A feature of Zoom, and we'll address them during the webinar. In fact, we've got two folks here specifically to help with Q&A. So we should be able to address those well. At the end of today's session, you will be prompted to fill out a simple 2-question survey related to the value that you receive from this session and any topic suggestions for future sessions. Your completion of this survey is very useful in continuing to shape the future of this webinar series, so please take a minute to fill that out. And lastly, this webinar is being recorded, and your TAM can make the recording link available to you. And then after a few months, we do make the recordings publicly available on the VMware TAM Services YouTube channel. So be sure and subscribe to that, and you can watch for that content to be delivered there as well as access past webinars, etc. So that brings us to today's speaker and topic. So vSphere 7 introduced some significant changes in the storage requirements of your ESXi hosts. And Jatin is going to first talk through the details of those changes and how you can best prepare for the future. And then after he's finished, one of our VMware TAMs, Tom Raftery, and one of his customers, Emilio, Salguera, are going to discuss how they approach the process of determining how these storage changes affect this customer's environment and how they planned for the necessary changes. So Jatin, I'll turn it over to you at this point.
Thank you, Andy. Thanks, everyone. Welcome to this particular webinar. With me, I have got two of my colleagues, Dev and also Falim. Both of are working with the vSphere tech marketing team, and they will be assist you in terms of the Q&A. So I would request you that if you have any question or any feedback or concern, feel free to share your questions under the Q&A section. So Dev and Falim can take over from there. On this particular subject, we have recently introduced a new system storage layout with the ESXi 7. And we have seen that there are significant issues that are being reported for the customer who are running a standalone SD card and USB drive. So we thought that it would be a great opportunity for us to share the technical details around this particular stuff, why the new system storage layout is in place at the first place, and then what are the issues that we are facing at this particular point of time when it comes to the SD card and USB drive, and what is the best way to move forward. So before I move into the ESXi system storage layout, let me brief you what actually we have done with the vSphere 7. If you look at vSphere 7, then you will find that there are significant changes that have been introduced in some of our core platform. For example, if you consider vCenter server, then we have removed the support for external PSC controller. And with that, it basically simplifies your vCenter server topology. If you look at the feature like vMotion, then we have optimized vMotion algorithm to an extent where it can support the large workloads, and it can easily migrate these kind of workloads from one ESXi host to another one. You can also experience changes in terms of the DRS. DRS is now more of a workload-centric algorithm rather than a cluster-centric algorithm. Now, if you look at all of these changes, and then obviously there was a huge announcement in terms of vSphere with Tanzu, in terms of some of the stuff that we are doing in the AI/ML space. Now, if you look at all of these changes, then what we are essentially trying to do is we are trying to deliver vSphere platform not just to host the virtual machines, but to host diversified portfolio of the workloads. These workloads can be AI/ML workload. These workloads can be cloud native workload. And that's why what you see is a new enhanced platform coming out of vSphere.
Hey, Jatin,
Now,
just real, we're not seeing the slides move.
I'm not moving any slides as of
Okay,
now.
perfect. Okay, wanted to make sure. Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you. No problem. So when we look at all of these changes, then we find that we are trying our best to deliver the platform which is capable of running different types of workload, right? And in this same objective, we have introduced a new system storage layout that is basically introduced with the ESXi 7. So if you look at the new system storage layout, on the left-hand side, what you see is the old 6.x system storage layout. And the key thing over here is, if you look at all of these partitions are basically fixed partition, right? You have system boot partition, which is of 4 MB in size, and that is fixed. System boot is basically storing your bootloaders, right? Your EFI bootloaders. The next partition is the boot bank partition. It starts with 250 MB, and it's again a fixed partition. So both of your boot bank 0 and boot bank 1 are again a fixed partition. Except for few large core dump and scratch, the rest of the partition in 6.x is primarily a fixed partition and a static partition in nature, right? Now, if you see a system storage layout that has been introduced with vSphere 7, what you see is your system boot partition has been increased from 4 MB up to 100 MB. And this is the only partition that remains fixed, but rest of the partitions are flexible. They are dynamic in nature, right? So if you look at the boot bank partition, your boot bank 0 and boot bank 1 starts from 500 MB and it can go up to 4 GB, right? So it totally depends on the boot media that you are using for ESXi host to run on, right? So depending on your boot media capacity, your system boot partition differs, right? So in case of boot bank, it basically scaled from 500 MB to 4 GB. Now, the next change that you experience with ESXi 7 is we have introduced a new partition, and that partition we are calling it as the ESX OS data partition. This is a partition which is of VMFS L type partition. So L stands for local. As you know that VMFS is basically a distributed file system. So we have moved away from VFAT partition to a VMFSL partition, which is more flexible, more dynamic in nature, right? Now, what we have done in this particular partition is that your core dump, your scratch partition, and your local partition, all of these partitions have been consolidated into a single partition, and that partition is basically the ESX OS data partition. This partition can scale up to 128 GB, and then this particular partition has been further categorized into two categories. The first one is the ROM data, and the second one is the RAM data. We will discuss the ESX OS data partition and its contents in detail in the later slides. But the point that I'm trying to say is the two changes. The first one is your system boot, your all partitions except for system boot are dynamic. And then we have consolidated most of the partition and then put these particular partition into a new system storage partition. And then that particular partition is basically the ESX OS data partition. Now, with this particular change, what we are experiencing is that there is a significant, not in terms of, not at the high level, but very slight increase in terms of the IO request that is being sent to the ESXi system storage stack. And we will talk about that, why this new increased IO request is being experienced in the ESXi 7 system storage. But because of this increased IO request, what we recommend is we recommend you to keep ESX OS data partition on a high endurance locally attached persistent storage device. So that's the reason that because we have a ESX OS data partition that is more of an active partition, whenever you query anything which is requiring you to, let's say, install VMware tool on your virtual machine, then you basically access the ESX OS data partition. Whenever there are logs that are being written on the ESXi system storage stack, then the ESX OS data partition gets queried. So this particular partition has become more of an active partition, and that's the reason we are recommending our customer to move away from using the low endurance devices such as SD card and USB drive.
Hey,
As I
Jatin,
was,
there was a question on the
Mhm.
Q&A.
Yeah.
If you can expand a little bit more on the significance of the 100 meg system boot partition.
Significance of?
The system boot partition. So it went from smaller size to 100 meg, and what's the significance of that?
Yes, I will cover that in the next slide. Thank you. So when we were talking about the dynamic partition, this is how your partition size will be laid out. So for example, if you are using a boot media, which is of 4 GB to 10 GB in capacity, then this is how your partition size will look like. You will have a fixed 100 MB of system boot partition, and then you have 500 MB of boot bank partition and 500 MB for boot bank 1. Similarly, if you go with a boot media size, which is of 10 GB to 32 GB, your system boot partition remains same as 100 MB across all types of your boot media, but your boot bank partition gets increased from 500 MB to 1 GB. Now, the question that Felim has just highlighted was essentially around why there is an increase in the system boot partition and what is the significance of it. So system boot partition is essentially storing your bootloader, and the boot bank partition stores your VIPs that you install on the ESXi host. These VIPs can be the core VIPs that comes with your ESXi host as a part of the VM kernel, or these VIPs can be part of the third-party vendors that are trying to integrate their solutions with the ESXi host. So essentially, the more and more solution that you install on the ESXi host, you are going to install more and more VIPs, right? So having a large boot bank partition allows you to integrate a third-party solution as well as VMware specific solutions with the ESXi host. So by increasing the partition size, what we are essentially doing is we are allowing our capability to install more and more solutions within the ESXi host in the form of VIPs. Similarly, if you use the boot media size, which is of 32 GB to 128 GB, your boot bank partition further gets increased from 1 GB to 4 GB, which means that now you are capable of installing more and more VIPs on the ESXi host. And whatever is the space that is remaining, that will be consumed as the ESXOS data partition. There are few queries that we have been receiving that I have installed the ESXi host, but I do not see the VMFS data store. Well, the reason is your boot media size is less than 128 GB, and that's why you don't see a VMFS data store after you install the ESXi host. So if your boot media size is more than 128 GB, this is how your system storage layout will look like. You will have 100 MB of system boot partition, and then 4 GB each boot bank partition, and then up to 128 GB will be consumed as the ESXOS data partition. And whatever is the remaining space, that will be carved out as the VMFS data store partition. So this is the reason why you see a different partition layout in terms of its capacity on different ESXi hosts backed by different boot media sizes, right? Let's talk about some of the system storage content that are being stored on each of these partition. System boot partition, again, it's 100 MB fixed partition. This is basically the bootloader which initiates the boot sequence and all of those stuffs. Boot bank partition, it has two symlinks, the boot bank and alternative boot bank. So boot bank partition is basically, as I've said, storing all of your VIPs that you install on the ESXi host. You can categorize these VIPs into core VIPs and solution specific VIPs. Core VIPs such as your core VM kernel, right? Solution specific VIPs such as anything that is related to vSAN, NSX, or any third party solution that you integrate with the ESXi host. Another thing that you see is the alternative boot bank. If any one of you have used a Shift R option to roll back your ESXi host to a previous version, that happens with the help of alternative boot bank. So when you actually invoke Shift R, which is basically the rollback operation to roll back your ESXi host to a previous version after the upgrade, then that's when the alternative boot bank partition comes into the picture. So this is how this partition content is laid out under the boot bank partition. The main partition that is in question is the ESXOS data partition. So let's quickly understand this particular partition. Any data that is being frequently queried is being considered as the RAM data. So for example, all your ESXi host configuration, all of your ESXi logs, right? Your scratch partition, these kind of data are considered as the RAM data, which essentially mean that if you do not have a persistent storage, then this particular data will be stored on the RAM disk, right? Then you have the ROM data. ROM data is something that doesn't get used more frequently. For example, VMware tool ISO, right? Your VMware tool ISOs are stored under this particular link, right? Under the ISO images. So whenever you install or upgrade virtual machine tools, it basically queries the ESXi host and it queries the ISOs that are stored under this particular location, right? Your network core dumps, so not the network, your core dumps, your system core dumps are stored under the ROM data, and the symlink for that particular location is basically var/core. Your locker is basically storing some of the configuration and some of the encrypted bits that is required you to run the ESXi host. So essentially what is being frequently written is considered as the RAM, and what is that is not accessed more frequently is basically considered as the ROM data. Now, the significance of this particular stuff is that with the new partition, which requires such high endurance device, let's say if you have ESX OS data partition on the SD card, then whenever you initiate VMware tool install or upgrade, then your SD card will be queried more frequently because that's where your VMware tool ISOs are stored on, right? Whenever there is a new log that has been written on the ESXi host, then in that particular case, your scratch partition will be queried out. And again, if that is stored on your SD card or USB drive, then what it means that you have an increased IO requests that are being sent to the SD card or USB drives. And then when we will talk about the flash storage, we will discuss why SD card and USB drives are not tolerating the high number of IO requests that are being sent in the ESXi 7 system storage stack. So the bottom line is the issues that are related to SD card and USB drives are nothing new. For example, we have keep recommending our customers that you should not store the scratch partition on SD card or USB drive. This recommendation is nothing new. Why we are recommending these kind of recommendation is that we want you to reduce the number of IO requests that are being sent to the SD card or USB drives. Now with ESX OS data partition, which has become more of an active partition, and it has a slight increase in terms of the IO requests that are being sent to this particular partition, your SD card and USB drive usage increased significantly compared to what you have been using in the 6.x. And with more number of IO requests that are being sent to SD cards, your SD cards are wearing out too quickly and resulting in some of the errors that you see in the ESXi 7. So why we have made these changes? Obviously, we want to incorporate the large ecosystem that is requiring us to integrate their solutions with ESXi host. As I have explained, ESXi 6.x had the static and fixed partition size. So when you start installing solutions like NSXT, vSAN on 6.x, then you have a very limited space, and then you basically get into an issue where either it's related to a capacity issue or it's related to a performance issue. This particular partition limits you in terms of what can be installed on the ESXi host and what cannot be installed on the ESXi host. Now, as we have already discussed with ESXi 7, with the dynamic partition, depending on your boot media size, your boot bank can scale up to 4 GB, which basically allows you to install more and more solutions on the ESXi host. As I was talking about SD cards, I have also informed that there was a significant increase in terms of the IO requests that are being sent to the ESXi 7 system storage stack. These IO requests are basically a result of two main operations. The first is there are new scheduled scripts that has been introduced with ESXi 7, and these scripts are essentially backing up and encrypting the system state and also updating the timestamp and saving some of the module configuration. Also, there is a new probe request that is being sent to all the storage devices that are available on the ESXi host. And these probe requests are essentially ensuring that the device does not remain idle and continue to respond to the service IO request, right? So in order to create a resilient, reliable system platform, we are increasing these particular probes, and we are probing each and every devices so that they does not remain idle for the long time. This is an interesting space, and I would like to expand this on this particular space a little bit more. There are new methods that have been introduced with the ESXi 7. And what are these new methods? So if you have ESXi 7 update 1, then you can actually query ESXCLI config store. So we have introduced a new construct that is known as config store. I just want to expand on this particular fact a little bit more, because until now we have been using host profile to do all the configurations, right? And with vSphere 7, we have introduced something called vSphere Lifecycle Manager. vSphere Lifecycle Manager allows you to basically create a desired state image, and then you can apply that particular desired state image on all the ESXi hosts that are part of the cluster. Now, we are working towards the configuration management part of it. Now the configuration management part of it, so the idea is you will have a centralized repository which will store all the ESXi host configuration on the ESXi host. These configuration can be related to the system, network, storage, as well as the third-party configurations that are coming from the third-party solutions and that are related to the ESXi host. So when you log in into 7 update 1, ESXi 7 update 1, you will see a new construct that has been introduced, and that construct is the config store. This config store is basically stored under the ESXOS data partition. And this particular config store acts as the centralized location for all types of configuration that are related to the respective ESXi host. This is work in progress. What you will experience in future is you will have a cluster-centric configuration management backed by the REST APIs. So the whole idea is you will have the desired state APIs to actually do the configuration management. You will have the UI pieces to achieve this particular task, as well as you will get the REST APIs to achieve this particular thing. If you have experienced something like vCenter server profile, this is the similar idea that we are incorporating for the ESXi host as well. And for that, we have this particular new construct, which is already available in ESX 7 update 1. And that construct is basically the config store. And that construct is actually residing under the ESXOS data partition. So what we are essentially trying to say is the old system storage partition was not enough for us to scale our solution and then allow you to integrate your infrastructure with the wide variety of ecosystem solutions that are available from third-party vendors, as well as from the VMware ecosystem. So with all of these consideration and limitation, we have adopted a new system storage partition, which is more scalable, more reliable, and allows you to basically store all of your configuration at the central repository that is known as the config store. So some of the flash storage things, as you know that any flash storage that you use is basically a consumable storage. What it means that it has a device endurance, which means that it has a limitation in terms of how much data it can write throughout its entire life cycle, right? What I have on the left-hand side is the Intel SSD. These drives are also the flash ones, but they have an intelligent mechanism in terms of understanding the different properties and different parameters that are available on that particular device. So for example, these SSDs are smart enough to distribute the data across the device so that it has understanding of the VL level as well as the distributed data level. However, when we look at things like SD card and USB drives, these drives are not smart. These are simply providing you the capacity, and beyond that, they don't have any intelligence in terms of how to use that particular block storage or flash storage. And that's why what you see is that SD card and USB drives wear out too quickly compared to SSD or any other industrial grade storage system that you have. So with that, what we are essentially saying, we are saying that, as you know, that ESXOS data is more of an active partition, which is being accessed more frequently due to device probe, due to the different function that ESXOS data is now performing, it has to be installed on a high endurance persistent storage device. And SD card and USB drives are not high endurance persistent storage device. So what are your boot device guidance, right? So the first option is the long-term supported, which means that you have a locally attached persistent storage device. And these devices can be hard disk, this can be SSD, or it can be very well PCIe devices, right? So if you have system boot partition as well as the ESXOS data partition is stored on the same HDD or SSD or PCIe devices, then this particular configuration is fully supported, and this is considered as the long-term supported configuration. The only configuration that involves SD card, the usage of SD card or USB drive and is supported is this particular one, which is termed as the legacy one. You should only use the SD card and USB drive for the system boot partition and not for the ESXOS data partition. ESXOS data partition has to be on a locally attached persistent storage device, which can be HDD, SSD, or PCIe devices. Now there was a concern around the deprecation of SD card and USB drive. So let me be very specific what we are deprecating. We are not deprecating the option number 2, which also has the usage of SD card and USB drive, but it only stores the system boot partition. What we are deprecating is that you have an ESXi host that has the USB drive or an SD card without having any locally attached persistent storage device for the ESXOS data partition. So if you are on this particular configuration, then this particular configuration is deprecated, which means that ESXi host will continue to run. You will still be able to install and upgrade the ESXi host that has the standalone SD card or USB drives, but this particular configuration will run in a degraded mode, and this particular configuration is deprecated. In the future releases, you will not be able to install or upgrade ESXi host if you do not have a locally attached persistent storage device along with the SD card and USB drive. So this is the option that has specifically been deprecated, and which means that you need to add a locally attached storage to your ESXi host before you install or upgrade the ESXi host. Once again, let me repeat, the deprecation means that your ESXi host will continue to run. You will still be able to install or upgrade ESXi host if it has the standalone USB drive or SD card in vSphere 7 version. But in future, this particular configuration will not be supported. So there are a few questions that we keep receiving from our customer. Is boot from SAN is still supported? Yes, it is supported. So what you need is you need a minimum of 32 GB of LUN. It can be FC, it can be FCOE, or it can be iSCSI. So boot from SAN is still supported. When you consider boot from SAN to boot your ESXi host, make sure that you ensure the reliability, the latency part of it, and then you should ensure the guaranteed bandwidth for each and every LUN, and that bandwidth has to be 100 MB per second, and it has to be sequential for each and every LUN. So in my view, yes, it is supported, but if you look at from the operations perspective, managing so many LUNs from SAN is not a very scalable solution, and then you also need to ensure some of the reliability and latency factors of it. This does not mean that this is not supported or this is not recommended by VMware. It's not that kind of a case, but you just need to ensure that you have the right latency and bandwidth requirement for the boot from SAN.
Hey, Jatin, there's a question
Yes.
about boot from SAN.
Yes.
The question is mainly if you expand the size of the LUN, would that automatically dynamically increase the size of the boot bank partitions?
I need to confirm on this particular thing. I think once you have installed the ESXi host, and after that, if you increase the LUN size, it won't affect the partition size. But it's a good question. Let me write it down and I can confirm this. But most probably it won't increase the size after you resize your LUN from SAN. Any other question that we want to call out? Okay. Another question is, what if there is no persistent storage available for ESXOS data? Well, in that particular case, so assuming that you are still talking about option number 3, which is running your ESXi host with standalone SD card or USB drive without having any persistent storage data. In that particular case, the ESXOS data will still be installed on the SD card or USB drive. And this is very specific to vSphere 7 version. But your ESXi host will run in a degraded mode and appropriate warnings will be displayed starting from vSphere 7 update 3. As most of you know that we have recently pulled out vSphere 7 update 3, but what it means that whatever is the replacement or whatever is the reworked patch release for vSphere 7 update 3 will also exhibit the warnings and messages that you are running in a degraded mode and you should move away from this particular configuration and have a persistent storage available for the ESXi host. For this, you can refer this particular KB article, which is 85615. Also, very important thing to note is the scratch partition. So if you do not have any persistent storage available, your scratch partition will be created on the RAM disk. And it will be created under a temporary folder, which is not a persistent storage location. This particular folder has a very limited space of 250 MB, which means that once this particular space is filled up, your ESXi host may exhibit performance issues if this particular space runs out of the capacity. So what is the recommendation? So the recommendation is you should offload your scratch partition to a remote location, and you should not install or configure scratch partition on the SD card or USB drive. If you do that, then that is not something that is supported. You can always offload the scratch partition to any remote location, and with that you can basically ensure that you have access to a persistent storage and you have access to all of your logs on the subsequent reboot. But just in case, if you have a scratch partition that has got created under the TAM folder, then in the next subsequent reboot, you will lose all the data that is being stored under the TAM folder. So it is a best practice to offload your scratch partition to a remote location if you do not have any persistent storage available for the ESXOS data. Another frequently asked question is around the vSphere auto deploy stateless installation. Are vSphere auto deploy stateless installation supported? Yes, it is supported. And in this particular case, as I have said, when you do the stateless installation, again, your scratch partition may get configured on the RAM disk. So if you are using a stateless installation, make sure that you configure a remote scratch location for the stateless ESXi host as well. There is one caveat around the stateless installation. If you are planning to use vSphere Lifecycle Manager, then make sure that the VLCM requires an stateful installation. So even though stateless deployments are supported in vSphere 7, but these deployments are not compatible with the vSphere Lifecycle Manager, and you will end up with managing your ESXi lifecycle with the same baseline approach that we have offered in the VMware Update Manager, and you will not get the desired state capabilities that VLCM has to offer. So in short, yeah, auto deploy stateless installation are supported in the vSphere 7. It is just that it won't work with the VLCM, and you have to rely on the update manager baseline to upgrade your ESXi host going forward. Can I stay at vSphere 7 update 2? Well, we do not really recommend any specific version, but in this particular case, if you have vSphere 7 and if you have SD card or USB drive installation, make sure that you upgrade your ESXi host to minimum of 7 update 2C. That's the minimum recommended version if you have SD card or USB drive installation in your environment. So this is the complete picture that we have discussed so far. What is deprecated is the standalone usage of SD card and USB drives. These are no longer, these will be unsupported in the future vSphere releases. When we say deprecation at this point of time, then it will continue to run, but it will run in a degraded mode. And with the vSphere 7 update 3, or whatever is the replacement release that comes in near future, these releases will show you the warnings and the appropriate messages within the vSphere UI that you are running in a degraded mode. Most of the customers are using dual SD card solution. Is this solution reliable? Well, this is also not a very reliable solution, because if you have a performance or disturbance, read-write disturbance issues in one of the SD card, it can be very well replicated on the dual SD card setup as well. So that is something which is again not a very scalable and recommended solutions from our side. In any case, if you have SD card or USB drive installation, then the only supported configuration with vSphere 7 is that you have SD card and USB drive with a locally attached persistent storage device. Persistent storage device will be used for the ESXi data partition, and then SD card will be used for the system boot partition. When it comes to the scratch, VMware does not support creation of scratch partition on SD card or USB drive. In fact, when you install ESXi host that has SD card or USB drive installation, installer doesn't create scratch partition on SD card or USB drive. The only way to create scratch partition on SD card or USB drive is either via some automated way of host profile, or by manually creating those partition on the SD card or USB drive. If you have that kind of setup, we recommend you to do not do that. It is not supported, and just offload your scratch partition to a remote location by just configuring the advanced scratch configuration, and then with the help of these configuration, you can offload your scratch partition to a remote location. In any case, if you are using SD card or USB drive for your ESXi host, make sure that you perform all the steps that reduce the overall IO requests that are being sent to the SD card or USB drive. So what are these steps? The first option is obviously enable tool RAM disk option. So as I was explaining the RAM disk, then what you have is basically currently whenever you install your VMware tool, it basically queries the VMware tool ISOs that is residing on the ESXi host. By enabling this particular option, what it does is it basically offload those tools ISOs to the RAM disk. And with that particular offload, it doesn't query the SD card or USB drive during the VM tool install or upgrade. So this particular option is basically set to default starting from 7 update 2C. But if you are on a vSphere version which is prior to 7 update 2C, make sure that you enable this particular option, and this will reduce the IO requests that are being sent to upgrade or install your VMware tool ISO to the SD card or USB drive. There is a KB article which is 83376, and you can find more information about how to enable this particular option. But if you are already on 7 update 2C, then this particular option is set to enable by default. As I've said, do not configure scratch on SD card or USB drive. This is not supported. For that, you need to offload the scratch partition to a remote location if there is no persistent storage available. This is also a good practice that you configure the network core dump, so your core dump doesn't get stored on the SD card or USB drive. So all of these 3 things, your tool RAM disk option, your remote scratch configuration, and as well as your remote network core dump configuration, significantly reduce the IO requests that are being sent to the SD card or USB drive. The another thing that you need to consider is if you have the standalone SD card or USB drive, you can add an additional persistent storage locally to the ESXi host, and then it can auto partition your ESXi host to use that particular disk for the ESXi data partition. We will discuss about these migrations option in next couple of slides. Anytime upgrade to vSphere 7 update 2C, because we have 2 bug fixes over there. The first one is by default, we are enabling the tool RAM disk option, which offloads the VMware tool ISO IO request to the RAM disk. Another bug fix that we have done is the queue depth issue that was experienced in the USB devices. So these 2 bug fixes were very specific to the SD card and USB drive issues that we have experienced with the vSphere 7. The KB article 85685 explain all of these details in its entirety. Whatever we are discussing right now has been documented in 85685 as well. What is the boot media recommendation and the device guidance? Any boot media, it has to be minimum of 32 GB. If you are using hard disk, then it has to be 32 GB. If you are using SSD, which is SATA hard disk, then it can be of 32 GB. But if it is PCI or NVMe, then it has to be 128 GB. So for hard disk, it has to be 32. For M2 PCI, it has to be 128. NVMe, it has to be minimum of 128 GB. And if you are booting your ESXi host from a SAN LUN, then that is fully supported. The minimum LUN requirement is the 32 GB. If you have SD card or USB drive for system boot partition, which was option number 2 in the diagram, and we can quickly see that particular diagram once again. Your minimum size of your SD card or USB device has to be 8 GB, but make sure that you are using SD card along with a locally attached storage device, and those locally attached storage device can be any one of these devices that are listed over here.
Hey, Jatin, there was a question about sizing and partitioning.
Mm-hmm.
So the question was that if we have a disk between 32 gig and 128 gigs in size, can you restrict some of the size so that you can reserve space for a VMFS data store? Or
No,
would it take it all up?
No, it will automatically take up all the space that is available up to 128 GB for ESXOS data partition. But anything that is available beyond 128 can be considered for the VMFS OS data partition, VMFS data store partition.
So if you want a VMFS volume, you have to have at least 140 gig on the drive.
Yes.
Over
yes.
that. Yep. Okay.
Yes.
Thanks.
Okay. There are so assuming that you are on option number 3, which means that you have standalone SD card or USB drive, then how you can move towards either option number 2 or option number 1. So let's talk about the option number 2, which basically means that you will add an additional local disk, which is HDD, SSD, or PCIe. Now, in that particular case, what you can do is you can either choose to upgrade your ESXi host to 7 Update 2C. Even if you do not consider upgrading that, what you can do is you can simply skip the step number 1, add the locally attached persistent storage device, and then you can reboot the ESXi host, and it will automatically auto partition your locally attached storage device that is available and that is unused in the ESXi host to be used as the ESXOS data partition. So by default in the ESXi boot configuration, the auto partition is basically set as true, which means that in the next reboot, if it finds any unused disk, it will repartition that particular disk to be used as the ESXOS data partition. So the solution is very simple. If you have an standalone SD card or USB drive, just add an additional locally attached storage. It can be PCIe, it can be SSD, or it can be HDD, and just reboot your ESXi host. It will auto partition that particular disk to be used as the ESXOS data partition. Now the question is, I have the vSAN environment where I have an unused vSAN disk that I want to contribute into the vSAN cluster. And then I want to use an additional HDD for the ESXOS data partition. So how does that will work? So the KB article 77009 explain all of these options in detail, where you have the option to skip SSD device to be used as the ESXOS data partition. So there are different options that are currently available with this particular option. But in short, if you add any additional disk and if it is unused and there is no ESXOS data partition on it, it will auto partition that particular disk and it will be used as the ESXOS data partition. What if I want to completely move away from SD card or USB drive? Well, in that particular case, you can back up your ESXi host configuration, add the locally attached storage device, and then reinstall your ESXi host completely on the newly attached storage device, and just restore your ESXi host configuration. The KB article 2042141 explain the backup and restore of your ESXi host. But in short, you can easily go from option number 3 to 2 and option number 3 to 1, which is basically eliminating the usage of SD card and USB drive. These are some of the technical resources that you can refer, and I will request Andy to just share this particular slide deck with all of you so that you have access to all of these KB articles as well as the documentation that we have up for the ESXi 7 system storage. Let me quickly wait for a couple of minutes, take any question if you guys have any, and if not, then I can hand over the session to Tom, and he can further drive this particular session.
Yeah, this is great. Just to reinforce your TAM, so to each of you listening, your TAM will be able to provide you with a copy of the slide deck as well as a link to the recording. That question has come up several times. And so I'll maybe between Dave and Fadlim, if you want to maybe work through the questions out loud.
Yeah, going through those. So a lot of those questions are related to the migration path. And I think Jatin covered those as far as, backing up your host configuration, reinstalling ESXi, but also there was another question, like quite a few questions that were asking if they could actually move the ESX OS data store to a LUN. Jatin?
Yeah, so if I understand correctly, if you want to move the ESX OS data partition to a LUN and keep SD card and USB drive to do the system boot partition, that is not supported and that is technically not possible. So how the auto partition happens is it basically happens on the locally attached storage devices. So what you can have is you can have SD card and USB drive for the system boot partition, and then locally attached storage for the ESX OS data partition. When you add a new locally attached storage device, then auto partition equals to true is basically set as default option, and it basically repurposes that particular device to be used for the ESX OS data partition. But this kind of configuration is certainly not available for SAN. What you can do is you can reinstall your ESXi host on a SAN LUN, and in that particular case, your system boot as well as your ESX OS data will be residing on the SAN LUN, but you can't really migrate the existing ESX OS data partition to a SAN LUN and keep SD card for the system boot partition. So that configuration is not supported. I can see another question which says, is SAN storage considered locally attached persistent storage? No, it is not locally attached persistent storage, but the SAN storage is supported to boot your ESXi host. And as I've said, in that particular case, all of your partition, system boot, as well as ESX OS data will be stored on the SAN LUN. We just need to make sure that you have 100 MB of sequential write on these LUNs, and you have enough bandwidth and low latency to access the system boot partition. I guess let me scroll down all of these questions. I will try to answer these questions via chat, and meanwhile we can hand over to Tom, who has other insights to share on this particular topic.
Yeah, that'd be great. And if at the end you decide there's some that you'd like to, to answer out loud, then we'll allow some time for that as well. Okay. And so, yeah, let's make the transition here. So again, Tom Raftery is one of our TAMs, and he's agreed to join us today with one of his customers, in fact, Emilio, and they're going to talk through how they approached using TAM metrics and how they approached the process of looking ahead and understanding if there were changes that needed made in this customer environment. So, Tom and Emilio, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks, Jatin, on that detailed explanation. That's a lot of information that at the time Emilio and I started working on the vSphere 7 upgrade process, I can say honestly, we did not have all the specifics, and there was a lot of new information in there that I found very useful. So I appreciated this presentation. So as a quick intro, my name is Tom Raftery. I'm a senior technical account manager on the VMware Global Accounts team, and I'm here with Emilio, my customer.
Hi, I'm Emilio Salguera. I'm the principal system engineer for Cox Automotive. I've been there about 7 years, 20 years in the industry, and I should be certified Monday with vSphere 7.
And what we wanted to do today is kind of help explain our experience with the process that we followed. We work very closely together on the Cox Automotive account. He and I meet on a regular basis, and a lot of the initial setup and foundation that we had in place working together was very helpful in our process to identify the particular risks to the vSphere 7 upgrade as it related to the ESXi 7 host hardware that was in place already for the organization. And we wanted to kind of walk through some of the steps that we followed. So I'll move on to the next slide here. And What I'm referring to is, like most TAMs and TAM customers, you probably have some recurring TAM status meeting where you meet with the entire team. You go over a lot of the agenda topics, things that are of a priority for the particular products that you're working on with VMware, SEs or the TAMs directly. So what we had found early on is there was an overabundance of topics, information. It was overwhelming. There's a lot of products in play, and there's just not enough time for us to actually dive deeper into the understandings that were necessary for me to properly align and assist behind the scenes so that I can produce as much value on the engagement with Emilio and the team and all the initiatives that were going on. So we made a decision early on that we needed to schedule a weekly recurring one-on-one meeting beginning of the week where we could sit down, review what we had talked about in the previous week, and map out, the priorities. As we all know, our organizations have different priority shifts and changes that happen on the fly. And in order for us to stay aligned, and for me specifically to stay aligned on the work I was going to perform behind the scenes, this was the most useful aspect of the decision we made. And I'll let Emilio explain a little as well.
Right. So the value we definitely found in having these meetings is to give us the view, the overview, and also the steps that we need to do in the present and the future time, as well as with upgrades and products and getting the technical expertise guidance that we need, and also having that engagement with the TAM, which is very important with me and the team as well too. We get to discuss details as far as products, upgrades, maybe issues, problems, roadmaps. And we also try to keep our TAM aligned with our projects as well too. So whether we look at that future product with NSX, Tanzu, that gets all lined up with our TAM services, and then who reaches out to the expert, subject matter experts to get us that proper guidance to see how we can evaluate these products and so much more. I mean, it's just not just with this particular issue, but it just has a lot more to deal with in an overall scale in our environment. So we definitely find these one-on-one meetings and also having these engagements. You have to have this relationship with your TAM to get all the information you need. And remember, the TAM works for you as well too, where he's able to get the proper information, the right information, the proper guidance, and again, getting the right skilled people to work with us to achieve our goals in our organization. So for me, it's a very valuable asset. Building the bridges, like you see at the bottom there, it's very important to have that relationship. You must be open and honest with your TAM and have these discussions, and you get results. And as you see a little bit further along in the presentation, you'll see the stuff that we encounter, what we did, what we work with, and how we work with internal teams and vendors as well too.
And I want to add to that, I felt that I was another team member engaged on the project that had responsibilities. So Emilio made sure that he let me know the things that he would benefit from my assistance so that I had things I can run with. And I definitely felt like I was another team member working alongside him on this. So we wanted to share that to give you the perspective of the relationship that helped us get to the point of early adoption of the SD card only solution. So one of the things that we worked on specifically on many different products is our strategic project planning. And when it came to the vSphere 7 project, he and I had the opportunity to really put together a white glove preparation plan that he could look at, refer to, update, and I could work from as a central place we could collaborate on for the things that he was working on and the things that I could work on independently related to the vSphere 7 project. So with that, I was able to work with our tools that we have available and all customers have, but really just take some responsibilities off of his plate so he can focus on more important things and put together the steps that we would want to follow to get started on how we were going to review all the material that's out there, because there's an abundance of it. One of them, obviously, a lot of customers were focused on new features and functionality like Tanzu that was coming with 7. So there was a priority from organizations to understand those features and do POC lab environment testing. But we needed to focus on the general vSphere upgrade planning that we would normally do during our planning session. So I took on those responsibilities. I put together, the notes that you see here on the screen, and it really helped us refresh the data set update the matrix as new releases were coming out, because it's a constantly evolving living document as new product releases were being released for 7, as you can see with update 1, 2, and 3. So this was a very helpful central place for us to work from.
Right, and just to add to that as well too, I mean, me and Tommy working together for like maybe the last 2 years, and we developed a great relationship in the sense of knowing each other's responsibilities, what we need, what we're trying to get out of our planning. And this document that he produced was excellent, where it keeps us a central location, what the things that we've worked on, what's been addressed, what are the problems that we found. And I love about these particular links that you can actually click on these links and it brings you to a particular site to check, make sure that you're in compliance, or we meet the upgrade path criteria. So this document has become very vital for us to want to show the team and say, look, this is the progress that we've made. These are the things that we encounter. Also to leadership to understand that some of the challenges that we have and what we have to go through are here applied in this particular project planning document. So these are all valuable tools that we use to leverage with the, for example, we use the TDM reports, and we also use Operation Manager for a little bit more granular level. And then we have the TDM reports for more an executive view, but at the same time helps to see the environment and what leadership needs to see so we can get the appropriate equipment that we need as required.
That's a great segue into the next slide. So if those of you who haven't run a TAM Data Metrics collection in your own environment, reach out to your TAMs to ask them about the TAM Data Metrics tool. It's a tool that I heavily leveraged since the beginning of my career as a TAM at VMware. It gives me visibility into the customer environment so that I can have intelligent, focused conversations specific to what's existing already, so that I'm not generally speaking on terms that don't relate to the audience. So there's a lot of information that comes out of the collector. It's a lot of metric data. It's comparable to running support bundles where you can kind of see things. It's a 24-hour snapshot view of the environment for your vCenter servers. And with that, it's a tool that I can take an export report that usually in the past would come out in an Excel spreadsheet. We've done a lot of enhancements on the TAM organization side to develop this and to collaborate on building Power BI reports that are very intuitive and interactive for TAMs and customers to leverage together. It can be shared so that you have access to it. And this is one of the things that we did on a quarterly basis. We try to get it done as much as possible. Cox Automotive has a very large environment, so it actually is a process with multiple data centers. But one of those things is that we want to make sure that I have the report available to me during my TAM status reports, so that as topics are coming up related to project activity, I can open up the report and have that visual representation of the environment to speak to the particular clusters, the data centers, the vCenter server that they're looking to focus their next initiatives on. And so one of the main things that I used this tool for related to the ESXi 7 upgrades was focused on what versions of ESXi OS builds were out there in the environment and which model and make hardware were in the particular vCenter server that we were targeting for the initial rollout of vSphere 7.
Right. In addition to that, too, it also, it helps us identify, the particular data centers that we're working on, what is required, what is needed, do we need to increase certain capacities and things like that. And this overview is just not, it's not for engineers, it's also for leadership, for management teams, where they can look at this at a high level view and can have that discussion within the room between your TAM, your engineer, and your leadership team to understand some of the process. And this really helps out because we get to have a holistic view of the environment and how we could, look at the next data center evolution that we're working on, and what new stuff we can do or add. And so this really helps us to see our footprint as well too. And it's more granular. It does have other data like, maybe virtual machines and stuff like that, but we just look at more of this particular focus on hardware, like the service, ESXi service levels and things like that. So this is a great tool for us to use, have a visual insight of our organization. And I recommend everyone to run this quarterly. I do keep Tom very busy. That's the honest truth. He works for me in that sense, and we make him work to what we need information and to keep us ahead and to watch out for us in the sense that, if the things we need to look out for, or there's a particular patch or pack, anything like in that situation, he's there for us to help us out and guide us through those situations.
And without this tool, I'd be, in a position where my hands were tied and require a lot of, information from the customer to constantly ask for updates and information in order to run with some of these tasks. So it kind of ties right into what we're looking at and the step that we followed for the ESXi OS upgrade planning and the hardware procurement considerations. I had data now available at my fingertips to work on offline as I open up our, best practice documentation that we have available publicly for all customers. I went through the material and I honed in on the ESXi hardware section and the prerequisites that were listed there. That started this journey for me to get the red flag of, wait a second, there's major changes that I will be honest, did not catch early enough in our discussions, but this gave me the opportunity to now work offline, look at what they have, talk to Emilio about the particular make and models that I found in the report, and ask him specific questions about what is the local storage you're using for those particular hosts. Now, that's not something that comes out in the TDM, so I just wanted to point that out. We couldn't see specifics like SD only, and that was very helpful, but it gave me all the ammunition and all the resources I could share with him for him to share it back. Just a very simple, we are using SD only in those hosts, and that started my journey in helping to line up the next steps that we needed to follow. And what happened there was coordinated efforts for me to work with our internal BUs for the vSphere team. I got in touch with the product manager for ESXi, who was extremely helpful in shedding light on exact details that were related to this upcoming challenge that we were facing with the hardware components, and all the guidance that I needed, all the resource material that was provided then to Emilio and Cox Automotive team for them to discuss and review internally. But it also allowed me to understand something that I had known in my past that I may have forgotten, where we got into this very repetitious, reusing of hardware. All the components were pretty compliant. You just had to look up for the CPU, compatibility and identify if that was a risk. But the life cycle of the hardware that was purchased did allow that CPU to be upgraded for 7, and that was checked off. But it then turned into communication with the hardware vendor to help them clarify, as a partner, they certify for our best practices. So they have early notice of our new releases. They get to work with it, and then they get to provide that guidance to their customers. So Emilio and I worked on some of the questions that we should be asking to the Dell vendor at this particular, that was the make and models that we were focused on for this initiative, and get their system engineer to really provide their perspective of what they would recommend to customers if they were to purchase new hardware of that make and model today with ESXi 7 embedded. What hardware would they recommend and ship? So that opened up the door for us to get the update from the hardware vendor to share with the internal teams that this is what they're recommending as well. It was not just a VMware guidance. It was a hardware vendor guidance, and it's something that we need to collaborate more on. That turned into understanding with 7.0 U2C and some of the positive supported information that was being shared from VMware at the time, that the customers were hopeful that U2C at that point was the solution. But in our early stages, we were not working with ESXi 7 in the environment, to be clear with everybody here. It was the planning stages. So we started this early enough that we didn't have to worry about some of the SD-related card issues that were being discovered in U2 that led to U2C. And we were talking about what are we designing for? Are we designing for a supported solution, or are we designing for a best practice solution? And Emilio helped guide me on that to make it very clear that, of course, we're going to design for best practice, and we want to, address some of the things in the environment that we know we can do a better job of. And so pointing out that ESXi is still operating in a degraded mode was one of the key things that kind of allowed us to share this information internally and get the attention to the need to update the components. In addition, there was the future releases of vSphere that were also specified from the BU that SD only will not be supported as a solution, so that the hardware that they had in place today that they were planning to upgrade to 7 is that a risk to the organization if the life cycle of the hardware was going to live beyond 7 into the future releases? So are we kicking the can down the road here if we stay with the SD only, or should we take this opportunity since we haven't really deployed 7 yet? So this was a great thing to also share internally for the planning and guidance. And that risk reward analysis was something that with all of this information, we were able to collectively put together and then provide that internally to the teams so Emilio can run with those internal discussions.
Right, and this also helped me to go back with my manager and also to speak to the vendor that we deal with when it comes to our hardware. And we was able to sit down and have conversations regarding the best practices and moving forward and how to avoid, how to best plan the moving to the new stage of getting the additional hardware. So we was able to work some leveraging with our hardware vendor to get the required hardware that we need for ESXi 7 to get into that M1 pulse card configuration. But what I've also found here too has been extremely helpful is understanding the layout and the degraded mode that as an organization for us, we do run high-end applications that require a lot of IO. And we wanted to make sure that we're not running in a degraded mode. And that's something that we do not want to introduce into our environment as well too. And it's something that leadership will now look at as an option to do. So we had purchased the right equipment for us to implement our strategy sometime in Q1, Q2 of next year. And again, we also looked at the future as well too. We looked at vSphere 8 and what's going to happen with this type of support. And having the TAM helped us get these answers that we needed so that I'm part of a team where we're planning as well too. The next, we call it tech stack, which is basically a new data center location and has all the latest gear, equipment, all the new stuff, all the bells and whistles. And we was able to incorporate this type of configuration that is required for our future tech stack, which is now part of our process of a part of our new ordering process for these new boxes. So we're also lining up what we have now present and what we're also going to have in the future. So we have that covered. So this would not have been done if we not had gone back and forth, me and myself and Tom and the vendor we deal with hardware, making sure that we stay aligned and moving towards the future, that everyone stays in this particular alignment so we can meet those requirements as we deal with the present and deal with the future of our data centers.
And the outcome of this was our ability now to really understand that this was information that was not going to be received very well internally as far as initial procurement of hardware that might have been purchased that did not meet requirements for future state goals and objectives. And we took the time to really put some facts, supporting notes, and our proposed recommendation collectively that we did put the research into, did think it through thoroughly and organize it in a way that we can share internally so that at a high level, the organization understood that there was a difference in expectations for hardware and that in order to meet their standards, that there was some decisions that had to be made on investment in some of the hardware. So some of the facts that are outlined here, are just really, identifying the improvements that we heard on how maybe hardware was being procured in the past. It did not include ESXi embedded, so the latest release was not part of that procurement order. There's an opportunity here for improvement so that in the future, the hardware vendor has that quality assurance capability to say, well, you're specifying an OS in here, and now we need to make sure we design it to our best practice standards that we certified based on VMware's guidance. That was very helpful. And also the opportunity to continue to engage with hardware vendors, input for any of the OS releases moving forward. So it's a collaborative effort moving forward now from this point to make sure that existing hardware is meeting those certifications that we would expect. So there could be changes that come. Maybe there's no changes at all, but as a new standard, we should just do the check and move forward with that. We wanted to outline, while SD only was supported with U2C, is this something that the organization would be accepting as a not best practice design and not support future state? And then the layout of the degraded mode supported option versus the best practice design option, and the investment in some of that hardware and the resources of the team to actually implement. This was not a simple endeavor, as you would imagine. You know, when you're working on the OS side, and you could do a lot of stuff remotely. We had now some challenges that we had to discuss and present internally, and that's where Emilio was able to take this, you know, information that's bullet pointed here and work internally to identify some of that.
Right, and most, I guess, and I can sympathize with a lot of customers in this chat where someone had sent out there was disappointed with how the information was not related. And I felt some type of way as well too, because me and Tom did plan how to, you know, get the rollout configuration and, you know, everything pretty much set up for vSphere 7 layout configuration deployment. So it was a little hard in the beginning to see this different requirement, and it would add some cost to it as well too. But at the end of the day, you know, it takes partnership with all three. It takes myself, it takes the TAM and the hardware vendor to come to these agreement and to work a little bit more together to get this information processed out, and also give us a heads up to our leadership or management to say, hey, this is things coming down the line. We might have to change this. We might have to order some stuff. And I think for us, we was in a fortunate position where, you know, we had the capability I would say the capability to purchase the additional hardware, and the hardware vendor working with us and making sure that we get the right price, and you know, for some of the headaches we encounter, you know, that some of the costs would be justified in the sense that, you know, it's all on three in the sense that it's VMware, it's the hardware vendor, and it's a little bit myself, but not following through a little bit more and going to that more granular level. But when we got that information, we definitely went granular and went into the process of trying to, you know, pretty much discover everything that we need to know, so we can give these options to our leadership and say, look, this is what we need to do. This is where we're going. If we don't do this, this is what can happen. You know, the pros and cons of not moving to those particular recommendation or proposed recommendation. Again, this also helped us now to make sure that we're already lined up for a new data center stand up that we're going to do in a different region. So we're prepared ahead for the 7 and 8 as well too, when we get to that point. But again, the present now presents itself, and we're prepared for that to move forward to hopefully be successful, which we are going to be successful with the guidance of our team collectively and working with Tom. So I'm very confident of what we've done as far as getting the details out, working with the vendor, working with our leadership team, working with our managers, and also working with our engineers too, because remember, there's different components that apply to this now. Now you have to have a physical body to go in, if you especially work in a data center. Now you have to think about the time and cost that you have to send an engineer to go plug these in devices, or we have to get a third party to work with us, and then working with leadership, and then leadership working with you know, with the actual hardware vendor for pricing and things like that, lining things up, making sure that individual team stake players that have a stake in the actual upgrade, like if there's a feature like SRM, NSX, you know, those things are prerequisites that have to be upgraded before we go to 7. So we was able to identify all these types of solutions that, you know, we may not seen in start of the planning, but as we got more granular, we got to see exactly what version we need to deploy. And it gave us version control to feel confident that, okay, we can release this particular vCenter revision and ESXi revision, and we should be fine. But again, as you all know, things would change within time. We was looking forward to, you know, update 3 because of the new NUMA features that it has, and the capabilities and enhancements. Also work with our new hardware that we also purchased as well too. So you know, again, it just has to be balanced between all, and cool heads will definitely prevail at the end of the day. So we was able to, successfully identify these issues, bring to management, present it, and able to get the hardware that we need so we can successfully deploy ESXi 7, again, around Q1, Q2, that we're looking to start deployment. And we've been testing heavily in our test environments with 7 upgrades, vSANs, looking at what we can take in enhancements and best practices, best features, apply the new features that as we see fit for our business units. So it's been a great help having Tom working with me for quite some time. I worked with TAM since I've been here with this company, and for me, it's been a great experience. Again, I emphasize that, you know, Tom works with us very well, and we do keep him busy. And my team is pretty big. We have a 7-man team, and he gets to meet with individuals to see what we're trying to do. at the end of the day, he tries to line up our projects all together to make sure that, we're meeting each best practice and making sure that one is not ahead of the other, and to make sure that we keep aligned as we move forward with our VMware products.
I want to thank, of course, Emilio for participating with me on this. I've had a great experience with him. I hope other TAM customers can, take some of the notes that are shared here from our experience, work through some of those challenges that you might have with your own organization as you have to work through this very sensitive topic. I know it's something I've worked with other TAMs internally to help them with their customers. And we wanted to speak to everyone today to kind of share this to the broader audience, because I think it should be helpful to kind of understand it's a difficult topic. It's not going to be received well anytime there's budget involved, and that this is going to become the, hopeful guidance that might work well for your organizations as well.
Right, and I will also consider it, as it's a discovery process where you're looking into the environment, and then you have actual data to present to your manager to see and to present the best cases of why these solutions are required. So these tools are helpful. The engagement with TAM itself, it's helpful. If you don't have a relationship with your TAM, and don't get mad at the TAM when things are not passed to you, it's part of you as well too, to get that information, to challenge the TAM for the information or the expertise that you need to understand your product better. At the end of the day, our organization paid for these services. We should take and leverage these services. And I understand that part of it is, I was upset too about some of the things that's happened, but again, your TAM has so much limited control of what information it gets and receive at the same time. But then again, you have a TAM who's willing to work with us, who feels part of the team, and we make them part of the team to understand what we're trying to do from a best practice, best solution. And you have to have a relationship, not to say that you have to have a buddy relationship, but it works to have a relationship with your TAM as well too. At the end of the day, it gets things through easy. I get to call Tom. I get to speak to Tom sometimes in the evening time, which is his personal time, because I do have some questions and I'm concerned about certain things, and maybe we didn't catch up at a certain time or something that I need help with. He goes out that extra mile for me so that I could, get that comfort level and to understand that my TAM has my back and things that I need as far as solution. I'm speaking to, a product expert, so I can get at that product expert, not at my TAM. It's helpful for me at the end of the day, because I'm able to speak to leadership and say, this is how we leverage our TAM services and what we use it for. This is what we discovered. This is what we found. And you can actually pull them into that conversation with leadership. And it helps bring that value of having that service. It brings that value. It justifies me spending my time with him and getting these right solutions for our organization. And we just got to move forward. And that's what we've been doing, working together. And again, it's always a good pleasure working with Tom. And again, I worked with other TAMs before. And my TAM experience has been pretty much good for the last 7 years.
I appreciate working with you as well. Thanks everybody for the time today.
Yeah, both Tom and Emilio, really appreciate your frank conversation and helpful, organized presentation, and certainly gives us all some ideas how we can move forward. Let me turn back over to Jatin and the team. Were there other questions in Q&A that you wanted to respond to out loud?
There are a few questions, and I see these are basically related to SAN. Yes, boot from SAN is supported, but it's not a locally attached storage. With SAN LAN, there are some overhead that comes into the environment, like latency and bandwidth requirements. So just make sure that you have the right bandwidth and latency under control. But yeah, it is fully supported. There are a few comments in terms of how the overall communication has been handled. I guess we are aware of this particular thing. We will certainly pass on this particular feedback to our leadership, and we'll make sure that it's been managed in a nice fashion going forward. There are a few feature requests as per, if you look at in that way. So certainly we have taken the notes, and we will provide these feedbacks to the product team.
All right, very good. And so specifically, did I understand that it was a latency issue? That I see the one question about how is BFS supported, but only ESX data and SAN on SAN is not. Latency, was that at the heart of your answer there?
No, so SAN is fully supported. If you are installing ESXi host on a SAN LAN, then your system boot as well as your ESX OS data will be stored on the SAN LAN. The minimum requirement, the bandwidth requirement is 100 MB sequential write for each and every LUN. What is not supported, and this is technically not possible, is you have system boot partition on SD card and then SAN LUN to be used for the ESXi data. So that is something which is technically not possible. So either you completely use the SAN LUN or you go with SD card plus locally attached storage device.
Okay. All right. Very good. All right. Well, we had a great attendance today. It's obviously a topic that's on a lot of people's mind, and so thank you to each of our speakers and participants for your time and willingness to share this information. As has been mentioned, several people have asked about the slide deck and about the recordings, and both of those will be available via your TAM. And so give them a couple days to let us get the info out to them and for them to get the info to you, but you'll be able to get both of those. And then there again is the VMware TAM Services YouTube channel. I did want to mention one other YouTube channel. So there's a kind of a partner group that we have called the VMware TAM Lab channel, and this is TAM's sharing presentations to an internal audience, and then ultimately they get put up on YouTube. And so I know that they plan on addressing this topic in an upcoming session as well. So if you don't already subscribe to the VMware TAM Lab channel, go ahead and look for that one along with the VMware TAM Services YouTube channel. And so with that, we look forward to having you join us in January for the NSX 3.2 What's New session. In the meantime, wish you a happy holiday season and all the best in 2022. Thank you very much.